I should have known better. I'd read enough tales to respect the desert, its whispers, and its warnings. But when Noah suggested a weekend trip to the middle of nowhere, I shrugged off my reservations. "We'll have a blast," he said. Layla chimed in, "Stargazing, Esmores, and no-cell service? Sign me up." Derek, ever the daredevil, was already mapping out trails before I could protest. We arrived at the desert campsite in Arizona late afternoon, the sun sinking into the horizon. The vast expanse of red rock and scrub seemed otherworldly, as if we'd stepped onto a Martian landscape. The isolation was intoxicating and unnerving all at once. I tried to shake the sense of unease settling in my gut. This was supposed to be fun. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we built a campfire. Flames licked at the darkening sky, casting shadows that danced along the sandstone. Noah pulled out a bottle of whiskey, and Derek started telling ghost stories. Layla laughed nervously, clearly unsettled but trying to play along. That's when they arrived. Out of the darkness came a group of 5 strangers, their silhouettes sharp against the firelight. They were young, like us, dressed in a mishmash of hiking gear that looked slightly outdated. One of them, a lanky guy with a cowboy hat, raised a hand in greeting. "Mind if we join?" His voice was warm, disarming even. Noah, ever the social butterfly, welcomed them without hesitation. They introduced themselves: Eli, Maeve, Carter, Sophie, and Jonah. Their smiles seemed too perfect, their movements just a fraction too smooth, but I chalked it up to my nerves. What was I expecting? Creepy drifters? They brought stories with them, tales of the desert and its secrets. Eli leaned forward, his voice low and conspiratorial. "You ever hear about the Skinwalkers?" His words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and electric. Layla stiffened. "Skinwalkers? Like Navajo legends?" Eli nodded. "Shapeshifters. They take on the form of animals or people. You can never trust what you see out here." The others chimed in, weaving stories of encounters with shadowy figures and unearthly howls. I found myself leaning closer, spellbound despite the chill crawling up my spine. Layla, though, was fidgeting. Her eyes kept darting toward Maeve, who sat opposite her. Later, she'd tell me she saw something, just a flash, like Maeve's eyes reflected the firelight too sharply, almost reptilian. At the time, she shook her head, muttering something about tricks of the light. We shared drinks. They poured from their flasks, insisting we try their concoctions. It tasted earthy, almost metallic. Not unpleasant, but strange. I took a sip to be polite, but something about the way they watched us as we drank made me uneasy. Like predators observing prey. The howl started around midnight. Low and distant at first, like the wind playing tricks, but they grew louder, closer, until they were unmistakably real. Not coyotes. Something deeper, more guttural. Layla clutched my arm. "Sean, what is that?" The strangers exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. "Coyotes," Jonah said, too quickly. Noah, ever the skeptic, laughed. "Come on, it's just the desert playing tricks on us." But then Derek gasped. "What the hell?" He was staring at his forearm, where 3 jagged red marks were forming, as if an invisible hand had clawed at him. He hissed in pain, but there was no one near him. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice rising. The strangers didn't seem surprised. In fact, Eli almost looked amused. "You're marked now," Maeve said softly, her voice lilting and strange. Layla bolted to her feet. "What does that mean? Marked for what?" The strangers stood in unison, their movements eerily synchronized. "Let us show you something," Eli said, his tone soothing, almost hypnotic. "There's a spot nearby, a stone circle. The view is incredible under the moonlight." Derek, against all reason, nodded. "Yeah, I want to see it." His voice sounded distant, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "No," I said sharply, grabbing his arm. "We're not going anywhere." But the strangers were already moving, their figures melting into the shadows. Derek followed, his steps robotic. Noah tried to grab him, but Derek shrugged him off with a strength that wasn't his. "Sean," Layla whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We have to go. Now." I didn't argue. I grabbed her hand and pulled Noah along. We ran, the sound of Derek's footsteps fading behind us. Then came the screams, animalistic, guttural, and wrong. They echoed across the desert, freezing us in our tracks. Layla sobbed, and Noah looked like he was going to be sick. "We can't leave him," Noah shouted, but I held him back. "We have to," I said, my voice breaking. "We can't help him." We stumbled back to the campsite, grabbing only what we could carry. The fire had gone out, leaving only cold ashes. Layla kept muttering under her breath, something about glowing eyes and how she'd known something was wrong. By the time we reached the highway and flagged down a passing car, the sun was rising. Derek was gone. When we told the authorities, they didn't believe us. Dehydration, they said. Heat-induced hallucinations. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Derek's screams haunt me still, and sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear those howls again. Folklore isn't just stories. It's warnings, etched into the fabric of the land. We ignored them, and Derek paid the price. I'll never step into the desert again. Some places are meant to be left alone. I came to the Grand Canyon for solitude and discovery, not for fear. My job as a wildlife photographer had always been about the beauty of isolation, but nothing prepared me for the dread I would face. The summer heat was unrelenting as I trekked through the rugged trails. My rented cabin was a modest haven nestled deep within the park, far from any town or other visitors. I thought I could lose myself in the landscape, but the wilderness had its own plans. It started innocently enough, just another day out shooting. I set up by a stream to photograph a herd of deer grazing under the morning sun. My backpack filled with essentials, maps, my phone, and the keys to the cabin lay beside me. It was there when I first knelt by the water, but when I turned back after just a few minutes, it was gone. I searched frantically, my calls echoing against the canyon walls, unanswered. I told myself I'd misplaced it. Perhaps I had left it farther upstream. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the cliffs in hues of gold and crimson, unease crept in. I returned to the cabin, exhausted, unsure how I'd even unlock the door. Relief washed over me when I found the spare key hidden under a loose plank on the porch. But relief was short-lived. The next evening, after a day of uneasy wandering, I returned to find something etched into the wood of the cabin door. "I see you." The words were crude, jagged, carved as though with a knife or claws. My stomach nodded. The rational part of me wanted to believe it was a prank, a cruel joke by some hiker passing through. But the cabin was miles off the main trail, and I had seen no one for days. The only other living things were the wildlife I photographed. I double-checked the lock that night, though it did little to ease my mind. The silence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating, as if the canyon itself were holding its breath. Every creak of the wooden floor, every rustle of the wind through the trees, set my heart racing. I told myself it was nothing, just my nerves. I woke the next morning to find my camera equipment rearranged on the small table by the window. My tripod leaned against the wall instead of standing where I'd left it. My lenses were unscrewed, lined up neatly in a row. At first, I thought I'd forgotten how I'd left them, but the neatness, the deliberate placement felt wrong. And then there was the food. The sealed packet of trail mix I'd left on the counter had been ripped open, its contents scattered like breadcrumbs leading to the door. I spent the day searching for signs of intruders. Footprints, tracks, anything. But the dirt around the cabin was undisturbed, save for the familiar markings of deer and coyotes. Still, I reported it to the park rangers. They dismissed it, wild animals, they said. Maybe a bear, though I'd seen no claw marks or signs of entry. "These cabins are old," one of them shrugged. "Doors don't always stay shut." I wanted to believe them, but the following nights only deepened my terror. I began finding strange symbols scratched into the ground outside, circles intersected with jagged lines, crude arrows pointing toward the cabin. On the third morning, I woke to find bones arranged on my bed, delicate, bleached white fragments of small animals, placed in a careful pattern. My breath hitched as I stared at them, my pulse a deafening drumbeat in my ears. I tried staying up late to catch whoever, or whatever, was tormenting me, but sleep always claimed me eventually. On the fifth night, desperation took over. I set a trap with my camera gear, arranging motion sensors and a trail camera by the porch. I wanted proof, something to show the rangers. When the motion sensor went off, its piercing beep startled me awake. My heart pounded as I grabbed my flashlight and threw open the cabin door. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but trees and shadows. And then, just beyond the edge of the light, I saw it. A figure stood there, its shape twisted, unnatural. At first glance, it looked human, but its limbs were too long. Its posture hunched as though it bore some great weight. Draped over its body was the skin of a coyote. The animal's lifeless face stretched over the figure's head like a grotesque mask. I froze, paralyzed by its stare. It didn't move, but its presence pressed against me, heavy and malevolent. Then, it screamed, a sound that wasn't human, nor animal. It was raw, guttural, filled with a rage I couldn't comprehend. I slammed the door shut and bolted it, my hands trembling. The scream echoed long after the silence returned. I didn't sleep that night, too afraid to close my eyes. As the first light of dawn broke, I grabbed what little I could carry and fled. I left everything behind. My equipment, my notes, my dream of capturing the canyon's beauty. Weeks later, the rangers contacted me. They'd found my camera along with the photos it had captured that night. The images started with me, asleep at the table, the figure standing just outside the window. Each shot grew closer until the last one, an extreme close-up of its mask, the hollow eyes staring directly into the lens. I'll never forget those eyes, and I'll never go back to the canyon. Whatever lives there, it's not meant to be disturbed.